we'll end tonight's discussion just by giving you a fiqhi perspective of what Sunni scholars say today. Sunnis today, they're very, very clear that the mut'ah marriage is not allowed. It's prohibited, it's not recognized, and they vehemently attack it. Like with passion, they attack it. Let's explore their fiqh and find some parallels between what they say legally and the temporary marriage. Number one, their first argument against the temporary marriage is that what kind of religion is this that allows a woman to marry a man, then separate from him, then marry another man, then separate from him, and she does this several times a year? What kind of dignified religion allows a dignified woman to do this? That's their argument. Okay. According to Sunni law, if you marry a woman on a permanent basis, you marry her, you give her the dowry, permanent. It's a permanent marriage, just like the normal katb kitab that people do, right? The permanent one. A week later, you divorce her. After you divorce her, she has a waiting period, of course, to wait out. You marry another woman. 10 days later, you divorce her. Then you marry a third woman. 2 weeks later, you divorce her. Fiqhi, technically, legally, are you allowed to do that or no? I'm not saying if this is right or wrong, or this is moral or not. We're not talking about that. I'm just saying legally, like in legal matters. Are you allowed to do that in an Islamic court? Are you allowed or no? You're allowed. So what's the difference between this and the temporary marriage? If they're saying temporary marriage is wrong, because if you believe in it, that means a man can marry a woman and then separate from her and then marry another one and then separate from her. You can do the same thing with a permanent marriage. What's the difference? If this is bad, that's bad. If this is not allowed, this shouldn't be allowed. Well, you guys allow that. If somebody is misusing these marriages, that's a different issue. But technically, they're valid. So you can't make an argument against temporary marriage that it's haram, it's an innovation, it's this and that, because a man can do this. With a permanent marriage, he can do the same. And you guys recognize that he can do that. So what's the difference then between the temporary marriage and the permanent marriage from this regard? The only difference is the temporary marriage, it ends without a divorce, just the time that you fixed. The permanent marriage, you just have to say, Zawjati taliq. 3 letters in the Arabic language. 4 letters. Taliq, that's all you have to say. There's no difference between the two. Especially Sunnis, they don't believe you need even witnesses when you're divorcing your wife. Some schools of thought say if you're sleeping and you say, taliq, my wife is taliq, she's divorced. Wallahi, I've seen their fatwa. Some of them, not all of them, some of them. Even if you get angry and you don't even know what you're saying and you say it, some of them say she's divorced. It's easy to get divorced in Sunni law. No witnesses are required. If they're attacking the temporary marriage because of this point, okay, this point is a problem in the permanent marriage too. So that's not fair for you to make this accusation. Keep that in mind. That's the first point. Yes.
Isn't it like 3 months for a wife? After she gets divorced, she has to wait 3 months.
The only difference in the waiting period is that with the permanent marriage, it's 3 cycles, about 3 months. With the mut'ah marriage, according to most scholars, it's 2 cycles. That's the only difference. But there's still a waiting period.
2 years?
No, the waiting period before she could remarry. It's 2 cycles, so 2 months. So let's say a woman, the husband divorces her. If it's a permanent marriage that she was in, how long does she need to wait before she can technically get remarried? 3 cycles, about 3 months. Now, if it's a temporary marriage, it's 2 cycles. But there's still a waiting period. So from that aspect, they're very similar. Should that 1 extra month is going to make something moral immoral? It has nothing to do with this discussion. By the way, these are the objections I'm sharing with you are from big Sunni scholars. This objection, what I just mentioned, is from Sheikh Shaltut. Do you know who Shaltut is? Sheikh Shaltut was Sheikh al-Azhar. He was the leading scholar of Al-Azhar maybe in the 60s, 50s, till the 80s, I think. For a long time, he was Sheikh al-Azhar. And basically, he comments on Zawaj al-Mut'ah. He says a sharia that allows a woman to marry a man and then separate and then remarry another man and then separate and do this multiple times a year. What kind of sharia is this? This is a shame. The same thing can be said to your permanent marriage if a woman does that.
What's their rebuttal after that? I mean, what's their answer?
They don't have objective discussions. They get emotional and they just attack. And then he says, if this mut'ah marriage was allowed and proper, do you find any Shia scholars allowing it for their daughters? See, he now is no longer academic. He makes it emotional. And remember, we talked about this last week. Those who say, would you allow it for your sister? Would you allow it for your daughter? We talked about that already. But see, I'm just showing you that even top figures, they use this language. They're not academic. They resort to emotional languages. So that's one point here. In fact, Sunni scholars have mentioned, if you go abroad to study, so you marry a woman while you're studying, and then your intention is to divorce her later when you're done with your studies. Is that allowed? Yes, it's allowed. What's the difference between that and temporary marriage? You tell me. With a temporary marriage, you fix the time. With this, you already know that it's going to be a temporary time. What's the difference? And that's why they have a type of zawaj called Zawaj al-Misyar. Have you heard of Zawaj al-Misyar? What does misyar mean in Arabic? Linguistically, which word does it come from? It comes from sayr. Sayr means what? Traveling. Basically, you travel to go and have a relationship with a wife. Now, what separates the Zawaj al-Misyar from the normal marriage? The husband in Zawaj al-Misyar, according to Sunni law, he stipulates as a condition that I will marry you, but I will not be obligated to spend on you. There's no spending. And I'm not obligated to spend time with you. Because in the permanent marriage, these are requirements. He has to spend on her. And she has a right to 1 out of 4 nights. But remember, this is a marriage of convenience. It's not one to build a family. So what does he do in Zawaj al-Misyar, the husband? He says, I marry you on the condition that I don't spend on you, I'm not obligated to, and I'm not obligated to spend time with you, to live with you. In Sunni law, is that allowed? Yes, it is. In fact, Yusuf al-Qardawi, if you've heard of him, he's the famous Professor Qardawi, he says, I do admit that this is allowed. Technically, yeah, it's not akhlaqi, it's not a good thing to do, but it's allowed. Okay, so you're admitting that it's allowed. What's the difference between that and the temporary marriage? Same idea, same concept here. See, their idea is, one of their objections to the temporary marriage is that the permanent marriage, the idea behind it is to have a family, start a family, build a family, have children. Whereas with the temporary marriage, that idea is not clear. Yes, if you have children, they are your legal children. But basically, people who engage in a temporary marriage, it's not for the sake of building a family. It's for other reasons. And that's why it's immoral and wrong. Okay, so with your misyar zawaj, if the man is making a condition that I'm not spending on the wife, I'm not spending time with her, is he engaging in this marriage to start a family? But you still allow it. So how do you defend it? Legally, how do you defend it? So what's the difference between the misyar and the temporary marriage? What's the difference? In spirit, they're the same. Very similar. The only difference is the misyar zawaj. If the man wanted to end it, he has to say taliq. He has to divorce. Whereas in the temporary marriage, no need to say that word. Either you just end the time, or you wait for the time to expire. That's all. There's no difference between the two. But again, the fiqhi Sunni perspective today is that temporary marriage is unlawful. It's haram. It has no basis in religion. Whereas these other types of marriages, yes, we could find a legal way to make them work. So they're strictly against the idea of the temporary marriage. even though their fiqh is very similar to the temporary marriage. And number two, we have so many hadiths in Bukhari and Muslim that confirm it existed at the time of the Prophet. Any final questions? Yes.
What if the woman gets pregnant as a child?
From the temporary marriage? So according to Islamic law, if the woman has a child from the temporary marriage, this child is just like the child from the permanent marriage. So this child will inherit the parents. This child is a full Shar'i legitimate child and is registered in Islamic law as a legitimate child. So it's important to know that the temporary marriage is a marriage. It's a type of marriage. And lawfully, legally, children can come from this marriage. And they are considered as equal as children from a permanent marriage. So Islam, our school of thought, does not distinguish between children that come from a permanent marriage and children that come from a temporary marriage. They are equal. In terms of them being children to their parents, they are equal in that regard. And so they inherit, those parents are their parents. They're biological, Shar'i, legal parents. So there's no difference. If she does become pregnant, that is her child. And there are no consequences. And remember, if they do have a child, they have to support the child. So the father has to spend on him just like he would spend on any child from a permanent marriage. Yes.
Say the problem is people don't know the difference if it's like a zina, like from zina or from temporary. You know what I'm saying?
Why do the people have to know? This is a contract between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you remember from our previous class, we talked about the idea of the contract and that it's a signature. See, it's mustahab to have shuhud, meaning witnesses. It's mustahab, no doubt about that. But in our school of thought, it's not wajib, because sometimes it's not practical to have a witness, right? So, as long as they are saying that we did the marriage contract, we accept their word for it.
The problem is, Sayed, I know a guy, he's like probably 40 right now, he has a kid from like 15 years ago, and he didn't go back to his country, and just because of that. Like people thought it was like an unlawful child, and he's like ashamed, yeah.
Why doesn't he come and say, I was married? Maybe he doesn't know the rulings of our madhab. A person in that situation can tell society, I am married, I am lawfully married. Yes, I didn't go to register the marriage officially, but I'm married. And according to our school of thought, that's lawful. No one can accuse him of immorality or adultery.
What happens?
We take their word for it. Somebody tells you, I'm a practicing Muslim. You take their word for it. Somebody, you go into their room and you tell them, is your carpet najis or it's pure? Can I pray on it? He says, no, I purified it. Khalas, you just take their word for it. If somebody says, you know, when I had a child from that woman, we were legally married. We take their word for it. Remember, Islam does not want to punish people and commit them and accuse them of adultery. That's the Umar mentality, in which he was quick to make these judgments. Islam does not want to punish people. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, as long as you're being responsible, there is a need for it, and you're saying that contract, and that's your signature, and you recognize that I am allowing this, it's fine. Allah has allowed it, as we talked about in our previous class.
Does he have to extend the contract? Let's say they did a contract for a month.
They can extend it.
No, let's say the contract was a month, and then she finds out in her cycle that she got pregnant. Is he obligated to extend that contract until she?
Yeah, he has to extend it if he wants to stay with her.
Okay, let's say he doesn't want to stay with her, but then.
Khalas, then she separates from him.
I'm trying to understand the rule.
Yeah, he's just like a divorce.
Yeah.
If somebody, his wife, his permanent wife, is pregnant,
So he's not obligated to stay.
a month into her pregnancy, he divorces her. Can he divorce her or no?
Yeah.
Can he?
But
What do Sunni and Shia say? Yes, he can. Now, her waiting period ends with the delivery, right? She doesn't wait 3 cycles. She waits until she gives birth for the waiting period to be over. But he can.
it makes sense.
Even in a permanent marriage, a husband can divorce his wife in her pregnancy. Yeah, that's not a moral thing to do. I agree with you, right? In her pregnancy, you divorce her. But legally, he can. Sunnis also believe in that. So what's the difference? There's no difference in that regard.
Wait, are you still obligated to take care of the child even if you divorce?
Of course, because that's your child. Yeah, if the divorce is over and the waiting period is over, he's no longer obligated to spend on the woman because she's no longer his wife. But the child is your child for life. He's your child. That's it. You have to spend on him and take care of him for life. Yes.
Either of you can stop it early if you want, the marriage.
Well, the husband can stop it earlier or extend it, unless she stipulated in the temporary marriage contract that I can also end it on your behalf. So, and if he approved that, then yes, she can also end it before. But if she did not, it's just like the divorce where he has the right. But she can stipulate it in the contract. Yes.
I was going to ask about inheritance. So if the man has, or he's married to another woman at the same time, and then he has a child from both women. So, and if he dies, is the inheritance the same for both kids?
Okay. So once we talk about the inheritance with respect to the kids, and once about the woman. As for the kids, if a man has a child from a permanent marriage, he has a son, and he has a son from a temporary marriage, he dies. What happens with the inheritance? They're just like two brothers, split. These two children are half brothers. So it's split equally amongst them. The child from the permanent marriage does not get any more inheritance than the child from the temporary marriage. No, they get equal inheritance. So from that aspect, they are equal, yes. Yes, the difference is for the wife. The wife who's a permanent wife gets 1/8 of the inheritance when there's children. She gets 1/8. But if she's a temporary wife, she does not get inheritance. That's the only difference with respect to inheritance. So the wife herself, if she's in a permanent relationship, she gets inheritance. If it's a mut'ah relationship, she doesn't. But the kids, they get full inheritance and it's equal amongst them.
What if he died during the marriage, the temporary marriage?
She separates, basically her iddah starts, her waiting period, and that's it. He's just liable to give her the dowry that he promised to give her. But inheritance, he's not liable. So anything she stipulated in the marriage contract, it has to be honored. So if he had not given her from the dowry, from the inheritance, they give her the dowry from the money that he leaves. But she's not entitled to like inheritance, like from his house, from his other assets, she does not get the inheritance. Any other final questions? So yes, so verse 24 of Surah An-Nisa. Surah An-Nisa is chapter 4, verse 24. That's where the Holy Quran approves of it. Now the Sunnis say, yes, initially the Quran approved of it, then God ended it. That's their argument. And that's where we disagree with them. But the Quran does approve of it. Chapter 4, verse 24. And they agree, like I said, Fakhr al-Razi, who's a Sunni authority on tafsir, he says, yes, I admit, this verse is about the mut'ah marriage, but I believe God later abrogated it. He changed it, naskh. So yes, there is a verse in the Holy Quran that does speak about the origins of it, or the basis for it.
So it approves it in the Quran.
Yes, it approves it in the Quran, but the Sunni argument is later the Prophet banned it, or Umar banned it. But the Quran initially did approve it.